You're listening to Beast Over Burden, powered by Barbell Logic.
We're Niki and Andrew, your personal professional coaches.
We help you take control of your fitness through hard but doable training and nutrition practices that fit your busy life.
Build a stronger, healthier version of yourself with lifelong habits. Welcome to Beast Over Burden, powered by Barbell Logic. I'm your host, Niki Sims. With me is your other host, Andrew Jackson.
Howdy.
Welcome back. Hope you're having a lovely Tuesday. Listeners, we're not in Tuesday. We are in your future/past.
Back to the future.
Yes. So we left off introducing the concept of training as it relates to finding physical freedom. We started talking about what types of exercises, what we believe is the minimum amount to do those exercises. And we started to talk about the schedule, the layout of what that could look like. And we're going to get more into that today to make it a little more specific, not so specific that it becomes a rigid rule, but as Andrew really is good at doing and likes to lay out as in his own words, let me help you make decisions. So we're going to work into what it looks like in a real live week for you to train in a way where you can reach the pinnacle of physical freedom. I say that, although it's really not really an end game. It just happens along the way.
Yeah, on that note, I recently saw a post by Scott Adams, I think it is, the Dilbert creator, comic illustrator. And he was talking about the difference between systems thinkers and goal thinkers, or systems people, goal people. And that systems thinkers feel a reward and a sense of accomplishment when they are executing the process, or they're doing the thing, the system that they're following, and how that's a much more sustainable way about going through accomplishing whatever it is that you're trying to do, working towards whatever you're trying to do, because the goal thinking only gives you that positive feedback when you've accomplished the goal, and that failing to meet the goal, it has a bunch of negative kind of feedback. And I personally experienced that. One of the most vivid memories I can remember is when I got my college degree. On graduation day, I felt absolutely zero sense of accomplishment or success. Like, I got done and I was like, are you kidding me? Like, that's what I've been working towards for the last, 16 years of my life or whatever. It was terrible. Like, it was one of the most demoralizing experiences of my life.
Wow.
I could care less about that accomplishment.
Thanks.
And that's happened almost every time I actually accomplish a major goal that I set up. To include competing in sports, I very rarely enjoy the accomplishment or the moment. I also recently saw actually one of the players on the Eagles basically post the same thing. And he was saying how he was surprised how it felt to be a champion. And then he had it all built up in his mind, and, just from all these, just watching other people's, because he'd never been a world champion before. And then he won, and he said he felt kind of good for like 2 days. And he was like, it was kind of depressing. He was just like, this actually isn't all that great. And he much more enjoys the process and, that fight every day. And I think those are examples of being more systems oriented, which, to tie back to what you said, I think that is actually what physical freedom feels like and is that it's more of a way to approach your day-to-day training and nutrition so that you don't necessarily reach some pinnacle, but that you just have a way of going about your physical life that moves you in a positive direction.
Do you think someone who's maybe more of a goal thinker can learn to become someone who feels the reward of a system thinker type?
Yeah, because it's moving what was it that we were talking about the other day, where the bright light of your attention goes. So I actually was giving feedback to a client the other day that was along the lines of something like that, where an example that we see often as a strength coach is that we start out really emphasizing adding weight to the bar. session after session after session after session. And that can kind of carry you actually for several years. The timeline starts to spread out. You may only get a PR, might push out to like a week or every other week or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. But at some point, you have to move the cheese over to the system because the PRs always stop. Chasing PRs is very much a goal focused area.
Yeah. And having your whole happiness being tied up in, I am happy when I get PRs. And I'm not happy when I don't get PRs. That's dangerous. Yeah.
And maybe it's sort of like, maybe you can move that to, hitting the assigned weight for the day. So maybe it's not a PR, it's a recent PR. You start playing all these kind of games to move the goal to something that you can reasonably achieve. Everybody talks about SMART goals, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. But I find that the conversation with the clients that I've had for beyond that probably 3-year range, if they haven't already by that point reached a systems thinking, I think you have to get there to be able to continue throughout the rest of your life. But it does, I think, require some either personal work, mental work, or some coaching to shift your mindset and train your brain to pay attention to something other than a goal. But really what you're doing is, you could argue, reframing what the goal is. So instead of it being adding 5 pounds to the bar, it's completing the workout, or it's paying attention to some detail of the movement and focusing on some aspect of your training that you want to improve. And you could argue that's a type of goal, but instead of it being based on an outcome, being pass or fail, it's, did you do the thing?
Or how was it when you did the thing?
Yeah.
It's like kind of even takes it away from a yes or no.
Yeah. But that was a big derail.
Well, I'm thinking about it. I'm on this little, in my head, I reopened my blog, which I don't think I've looked at it in years and years and years. And I found it and I opened it up and I started reading some of my old articles, old blog posts that I wrote. And I had caught one comment in there where I was very much teaching my clients that the only thing that matters is putting weight on the bar next time. And this I wrote close to 10 years ago. I think it was in 16.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I'm going to edit that because things have changed and you have to be more open-minded to what success means. And so, yeah, I think that's something that you learn as you go on and on. That's the whole point of this topic, is how do you keep it going on and on? Because if you have this expectation and happiness only occurs when that expectation is met, now you have the burden again of being unable to win, unable to succeed. And it always feels like a chore instead of a process that you can find joy in.
It's a very powerful motivator to say things that are very simple and black and white, like the only thing that matters is adding 5 pounds to the bar. It's the only, and you can argue that perspective, fine. I personally did not find it to be useful after a certain period of time. And I would say most of my clients don't either. But for the purpose of this conversation, I think what we're doing, what the intention is to help people develop a systems frame of thinking, give people first principles that enable them to make decisions that have structure and the ability to adjust based on either personal preference or goals changing or
hey, work got crazy today. I need to move my schedule to tomorrow.
Yes.
Which some people think when you have to do that, they think they've missed a workout and they're a failure.
Exactly.
It's not.
And the real why, in my opinion, is people will get stronger if they have the ability to make decisions in those moments that keep them training than they will be if they think they're not doing the program, so they stop. We have to keep going.
Yeah.
We have to keep training.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing. And that's the thing that will enable you to be physically free in the long run, not doing exactly what some general template or program that somebody wrote and is making money off of convincing everybody else that they need to do things this way, by the way. So they're incentivized to tell people the only way to do it is this one right way, which is not true. Objectively not true. So,
boom.
Does it work? It can. Does that mean that's the only way? No, absolutely not. That's just, we know this because you can demonstrate it in reality. You don't have to argue about it on the internet. I can get people stronger with hundreds of different programs.
Yeah.
There's no one program. There's a lot of programs that do work for most people, but they can be modified in an infinite number of ways. So let's talk about what kinds of criteria and first principles people can apply.
Well, we touched a little bit on frequency last week. We were saying, can you get at least 90 minutes in per week?
Right.
And if we could turn that into, if someone is pretty open, they're like, okay, what would be great for me to do? What would be the best layout for my schedule? I would say it's probably 3 times a week, maybe 4. Very close to being 3 or 4.
Yeah, those are probably the more optimal, if you will. We've talked about it last week too, that certainly 1 would be like, if you can do 1, great. But I would say most people seem to be able to progressively overload reasonably well with somewhere between 2 to 4. And yes, I would say 3 to 4 tends to work better just because you've got obviously more time to work with.
Yes.
To accomplish what I think is goal number 1 that we want to be on the same page about, which is that we want, as we talked about last week, we want to train the most muscle mass as we can. Ideally, you deconstruct your workout to show that you've trained all the major muscle groups. Like you talked about, we want to bend the knees, bend the hips, and move the shoulders. But if you take it down a level further than that, right, we're trying to, we don't want to turn this into a huge anatomy lesson, but you want to train your quads, your hamstrings, your hip extensors. Well, maybe I should just, without going into that level of detail, your knee extensors and flexors, your hip extensors and flexors, your shoulder flexors and extenders, and your elbow flexors and extenders. Right.
And let's throw in some abdominal isometric work in there.
Right. Yes. The great news with, again, most barbell training is that you're always training your abs.
Yeah.
Which is another big reason why I think barbell movements, compound movements, are so powerful. But anyways, over the course of the week, you want to be able to look at the program and be like, okay, yes, we typically don't program in terms of body parts, but you should be able to deconstruct your program and, you should be able to go kind of head to toe and map out that you've trained all of those muscles.
Which I would, to give it lots of detail, I would say, are we doing heavy lower body 2 to 3 times a week? So are you squatting and deadlifting 2 or 3 times a week? Are you doing bench or press 2 to 3 times a week, ideally 3? And then how about some upper back biceps pulling exercise like a row or a chin up 1 to 2 times a week? Very simple. That's what I want in the weekly menu in some arrangement.
Yeah, and you're going to want somewhere between, on the next level of detail, you want to start talking about how much work.
Do it. Bring the D.
How much work we're doing.
Yeah.
In terms of sets. That's going to be our primary metric for work volume is sets. And importantly, they need to be hard sets. So they're pretty much, you want to be somewhere between 2, at most 4 reps from failure, which is really hard to know unless you've actually failed a bunch of times. And it's also going to be harder to know the lighter the weight is because it's harder to tell the difference between actual muscular failure and just getting tired of doing the movement.
Yeah.
either cardiovascularly or just the burn that you have to suffer through when you can still suffer through it if you really wanted to.
Yep.
Really hard to tell the difference when you're at rep 40 or 50 versus rep 3 or 4 or 5. Which is why I tend to recommend reps somewhere between 4 and 12, I would say is kind of the sweet spot. On the low end, if you're so heavy that you can barely do 3 reps, unless you're training for absolute max force production 1RMs, PRs like that.
I'll throw the doubles in with like an EMOM. I like an EMOM for a deadlift or something where it's like 5 sets of 2 because I know they can hold really good form, but it's not like the weight that's driving intensity, but the cumulative work over something like that is something that I found they can maintain form over, but it's definitely not like high intensity doubles.
There's a million different ways you can accumulate
Yeah.
volume. The reason I personally prefer on the low end reps of 4 are for getting maximal motor unit recruitment. And that based on the data that I've seen, you get diminishing returns of motor unit recruitment after 4 or 5 reps. So you're going to get most of your bang for your buck in terms of recruiting as much muscle mass as possible. After about rep 4, you're at like 80% or something like that. And then it's diminishing beyond that.
Wow.
Assuming you're, again, getting close to failure, 1 or 2 reps from failure. So with doubles I think are great for power production and, being able to do a heavy weight. But often most people are wanting to build muscle mass, it's slightly more, effective for hypertrophy. But to do doubles work? Sure. Absolutely. I think that's a great example of physical freedom. I would give the first principle around 4 or 5 reps kind of being the minimum, because it's going to be a little better for muscle hypertrophy. But if people want to deviate from that and do doubles and accumulate more work, that's great too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all right. You're not going to be arrested.
Yeah.
Everything's fine. Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's like, that's a great example in my mind of having a first principle while also having the ability to deviate from that if you are doing it for a different reason. But if we're going back to picking sets first, I am typically trying to get somewhere between 9 to maybe 15, 20 sets at the most for a muscle group.
And that's by the time you get to your work set. Like we're just counting work sets.
Just work sets, yes. Which, let's use the basic novice linear progression as kind of a template that we can refer to that most people understand. So think about that. You're typically doing 9 squat sets, and generally early on you're doing another 3 deadlift sets.
Per week.
Yeah. So you're doing 12 total work sets for your lower body, which is going to be working your quads and your glutes, to some extent your hamstrings, and obviously a lot of other muscle groups. But your prime movers are knee and hip extensors. So that's why I think that is a generally good place to start, is you're right there in that sweet spot, somewhere between 10 and 20 sets, kind of on the low end, but you're going to accumulate a really solid amount of work. Same for the bench and the press that you're alternating there. You're in that 9 sets per week kind of spot, titrating the weight up, progressively overloading the weight to try to find those productive hard sets. And I think you can then take that out to infinity.
Yeah.
Based on how much time you have available. Or shrink it down if you only have 2 days. But, figure out how to get somewhere in that range and build from there. And then kind of moderate based on time available in order to train an increasing amount of muscle mass. So I often find with noobs, for example, new lifters that have done the LP for a while, the disadvantage with compound movements I find is that they train the muscles that limit the movement really well for a really long period of time. But there's a whole bunch of other muscles that aren't actually getting pushed eventually to failure.
You have a good example of this one.
Do I have a good example of that?
And I know you do.
Oh, well, I would say it's the arms mostly.
Yeah.
Like the arms just don't get a great, the classic joke about somebody who's run the novice linear progression is they look like a T-Rex. Giant legs and ass and no arms.
Yes.
And one of the first things you can do to kickstart, especially your bench and your press, is to work on arms.
Yep. Chin-ups, curls, tricep extension of some sort, rows. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. A lot of accessories that I find you get a ton of bang for your buck are going to be arm work for the upper body, because also the upper body is one of the first to stall out. And my theory on that, my first principle is that particularly the triceps, you're not able to do enough work with just the bench and the press to get past that sticking point.
They seem like that isolated movement, you can handle more reps, or it seems to do well with more reps They get the heaviness exposure on the bench and the press. And then, when you get to like sets of 8 to 10 on accessory work, that seems to go well.
Right. You're just neurologically, I think, able to do more work with smaller muscle groups. Or the calves might be another example. Some people just might not ever develop calves because they're just not doing enough volume. And you can train the heck out of your calves. You don't need a ton of rest. And it just seems like you can do a ton and need to do a ton.
I don't know. I must be missing something. Every time I do calf races, they're instantly extremely painful.
I wonder if that's because your shanks are like
I hate them.
10 feet long. Like, you have that part of your leg is like
my lower leg is really long.
Yeah. Well, and actually, you have really long femurs too.
I thought it was my upper part of my leg. Yeah.
I mean, both parts of your leg are extremely long.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know. Triceps.
Triceps, biceps can handle a good amount of hammering. And the back really does well too when you get into the rows and the chin-ups.
Yeah, you've done a lot of volume with those.
Yeah, getting heavy. And even when you first start doing chin-ups with just your body weight, that's pretty high intensity. You might be pretty much almost always one rep away from failure.
Yeah, I mean, we pretty quickly start drifting into thinking about recovery when we give these prescriptions, because that really, I think, becomes the limiting factor in your ability to progress, is whether the stress is...
Why, Andrew? Why not? If I can do those exercises and I have 7 days a week, why should I not do that 7 days a week?
Well, yeah, because you're not going to be able to recover.
Right.
The adaptation requires that you have the ability to recover for a couple of reasons. One is that's where your growth is going to happen. Your body needs to be able to have time to be able to grow, but then you also need to be able to show up for the next session and go hard again. So I don't know what the answer is. Everybody seems to be a little bit different. I have some clients who can go really hard frequently and they continue to progress. Great, do that. This is similar to kind of finding your baseline on the nutrition side. I think you have to pick a starting point, be consistent. This is why I do think something like starting with the novice linear progression is a good starting point, because I think for somebody who's not familiar with what their baseline ability is to recover, start with something generic and simple, progressively overload that with moderate weights because you're in the fives. And then you can start deviating and experimenting with that, as we've talked about ad nauseum, with minimum effective dose changes. If you haven't listened to that series, go back and check it out. I think, it gives you a lot of those tools. But generally speaking, the more muscle mass you're using, which is what we strive for with this shorter list of exercises, the more fatiguing it's going to be. So there are squat everyday programs, and there are a lot of people that have gotten a lot of success and progress from that. But
probably in your 20s.
Most of the people listening to this, I don't think will.
Yep. Yeah. And you'll know, because you'll feel like really different between training sessions. Like when you have a good training day and you're like, yeah, I'm hammering it, everything feels really good, I should do this again really soon.
Right.
And when you go back too soon and it just like everything feels so hard, and you don't even need to be sore. It's just you're not recovered, so you can't like get as tight, you can't express as much of your ability to be strong. It just feels so different. So you start to get into like the different ranges of what it feels like to be recovered. I definitely know what that feels like.
I've definitely also experienced that. I just made no progress for like a year when doing CrossFit early on. I made a little bit of progress. I think I got up to like 3 sets of 5 at 220 pounds.
Look
basically
at you. Wow.
2 plates. Granted, I wasn't squatting very often, but I was training. I was working
doing
out
stuff. Yeah.
A lot. And then it just stopped. And then all I did was less training. And all of a sudden, of course I ate more as well.
Yeah.
But the weights just started going up again.
Yeah.
That was because of recovery, both the food, getting more calories, and training less. That allowed me to progress.
I honestly struggle with this one because I just like working out so much. It's like, it's so true that there's an amount that's too much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so do you feel that way though, if you put it back through the lens of physical freedom though? what's the goal? Like if you enjoy working out that frequently, really what you're having to then have the conversation that you're having, it seems to me is it the priority to make progress indefinitely, or maybe not indefinitely, but, or at least where you're at, you have that choice. You understand that you can work out more. It'll feel good.
Yeah.
You'll enjoy it. But what do you really want?
Bigger legs. Which means not all the times that I want to.
Yeah. But so that is a little bit sad, even if you know the
It's
truth. Yeah.
It's just fun. But it's also sometimes reassuring because then when you get to that point, you're like, oh, well, I don't have to do more. I get to do less and I'll feel better. So
Totally.
I don't know. It's just a fun game that I end up making myself play.
Yeah. I mean, it is definitely an individual thing. I have some clients where I have to constantly talk them off the ledge to do more.
Yeah.
I was there too. I grew up as an 80s and 90s kid. It was always do more. The solution was always rocky yourself into the ground.
Yeah.
Carry logs, train 24/7. There's no discussion of the concept of recovering.
Yeah.
Always do more. And if you couldn't recover, that meant you were just weak, usually, or at least that's what I remember feeling.
Yeah.
I so clearly overtrained
Yep.
my sophomore year in college.
Very obvious.
And
oh, man.
I just completely melted down. Like I could barely do what I would have considered like a warm-up piece. Body was just shut down, but I was
done. Is that when you were running all the time too? Were you running and rowing?
Well, yeah. I mean, I was training twice a day, lifting weights and not eating enough as a 19-year-old, while also, taking 20, 21 credits or whatever in school.
Yeah.
And not sleeping very well either, because I was staying up studying, getting up at 4 a.m. to go lift and then going to practice. And in hindsight, it was ridiculous. And then I'd been training nonstop for over a year and did a summer camp where I was a mover and then would go and row for 2-3 hours at very high level of competitive intensity. And again, not eating well, and the body just eventually crashed. But at no point in time did I think, I just thought, I'm failing, I'm weak.
Right.
I don't have the mental fortitude to push through this. And that carried on for, until probably 15 years ago when I really started kind of understanding this principle of stress recovery and adaptation.
Yeah. It's interesting how recovery started to be monetized with things like ice baths and
That is such a good point.
types of shoes you can wear. Like someone picked it up and they're like, oh, now we need more recovery. How can I sell that?
It is definitely indexing on recovery for the last 10 or 15 years. That's a really interesting point. Now everybody's got to have their perfect recovery protocol.
Yep.
At all times. The leg sleeves that you inflate and put on your...
There are entire businesses that I walk around in Orange County that are just for recovery, which is just like...
You can go get an IV drip now.
Yep.
Any day of the week.
Yep. Can sit on one of those big, I don't know what they're called, huge massage roller things. They have one. European
those are
things.
just public masturbation
Yeah,
things.
They have one of those right by the gym. Yeah.
Those are amazing. There's probably a lot of people here that have no idea what we're talking about, but how would you describe them?
It's like a 2-foot circumference cylinder with knobs on it, and it rotates, and you put your
just
body
sit on
on it.
And it looks like a Pilates class, a lot of yoga pants,
Yes.
and women in their 30s sitting on this roller machine, and it feels amazing as far as I can tell.
Prescription for hysteria has come a long way. But yeah, anyway, yeah, recovery has become monetized. Foam rollers, all the stuff. When the simplest answer is eat and sleep. That's really 90% of what you need, maybe 95%.
It's the big rocks for sure.
I was listening to talk about your favorite podcast again, All In. I listened to the one with Naval. And I guess Chamath had dinner with that guy who's doing all the stuff to live forever. Yeah, and he was talking about all his protocol, but really the thing that it really came down to was sleep.
Just get good sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a toughie.
Yep. That was the big rock for sure.
Well, All right, so we know what the week's going to look like. We know that you need to have some off days, and I think that's where we should leave it for today. We get into more about how to manage your training, be a beast, not be a burden on our next episode. We'll see you next week, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.